And I'm Kevin Swank. I am Director of Marketing for Black Box Network Services. Like other colleagues, have been in wireless a long, long time. Been working in in-building wireless for about a dozen years now. So seen it evolve quite a bit, and it's going to be exciting still. So.
All right, now we know there are at least 3 known current business models out there for the enterprise space. What do we see as the roles for the enterprise, the carrier, and the system integrator in those roles today?
So I'll take that one. So as Kevin mentioned, there's different verticals that need in-building wireless, whether that's Wi-Fi or a distributed antenna system for cell coverage. But we really have to look at that a little bit deeper. So there's a big difference between a public venue, say a stadium or an airport, and a hospital or an enterprise. And so there are different business models because there are different types of buildings. So there's carrier-led business models where the carrier is funding and putting in systems. There are what we call 3PO, third-party operator models, where they're acting as a funding source and then working with the carriers to put those systems into venues. And then there's the enterprise-funded models, where the enterprise is funding and paying for distributed antenna systems or small cells, just like they're paying for Wi-Fi. So a lot of it depends on the types of buildings, but the ecosystem in all of those different models really stays the same. The enterprise is involved, the carrier is involved, a third-party operator may be involved, and there's a system integrator. So everybody has a role. Obviously, the enterprise has the building, or is either a tenant or owns the building. So they have a vested interest in making sure that they have the right coverage, and as Kevin said, more now, capacity. Do you have the capacity to handle the data traffic that's going on inside of your building? So that that's a vested interest. But the carriers also have an interest because there's a densification that's happening in the network, and every amount of traffic that can be taken off of the macro network and put inside of a building helps the macro network. It helps the speeds that are happening in the network. So the carriers have a vested interest. In fact, the carriers are defining the criteria that in-building wireless systems have to achieve for them to connect to those systems. And the 3POs come into play because they may actually be funding a lot of these and then leasing them back to the enterprise and working with the carriers. But really the glue in all of this is the integrator, because the integrator does the RF design. They work directly with the enterprise to understand the needs of that enterprise. They work with the carrier to coordinate connectivity to that carrier, and they bring it all together. So the different business models out there, but really the players remain the same.
In a DAS system, they're not all the same, we know that. How do you make the differentiation between, say, a DAS, a hybrid fiber coax, a fiber only, a Cat5? I mean, I think we're all bleeding away from the Cat5 thing, but at the end of the day, how do you make that differentiation for a particular site?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, even 2 years ago it was very simple because there was only one DAS architecture. I mean, there were different DAS manufacturers and they all had their own secret sauce with respect to what goes in it, but they all had a certain amount of fiber, a certain amount of coax cable. And we had all of these things like this one over here, these passive antennas. And so it was very obvious, what to do. Now, we still had to engineer it, and they're hard to engineer, but there was really only one choice from an equipment perspective. So then small cells started coming in, and there's been a lot of hype. We're still, I think, in the hype cycle with respect to small cells. And what can they really do, and can they really lower the barrier to entry? Because, Kevin's right, DAS cost a lot. They're heavily engineered, the equipment's expensive, the carrier connectivity is expensive. They can be really, really expensive. So, we've worked in things like hospitality where the goal is, okay, what kind of architecture could we come up with to drive down the cost, to make these things easier? And because it's one thing if you're working in a stadium, and it's another thing if you're working in a Motel 6 and you're trying to provide equivalent service. It's not the same, it's not the same from that perspective. But one good thing that's come out of the small cell arena is the small cells are really trying to drive the cost down. Like I mentioned, Cisco trying to, basically adding a 3G module to their access point. That starts to drive the cost down. Now, there's still a certain amount of engineering, but at least that's in the right area. Well, what's happened is that push into small cells has caused all of the DAS manufacturers to reinvent themselves. And so now we have all fiber DASs, we have coax Cat5 based or Cat6 based DASs, we have digital DASs, and so all of a sudden we have DAS in almost every flavor that you can think of. But the one thing that's most interesting about all of these things, even though they all come in different flavors, is they're starting to really become more enterprise architectures. So if you think about all fiber DAS, and you think about things like passive optical networks, you think about taking Wi-Fi and being able to run it over fiber in the same way that and use that same fiber backbone for Wi-Fi, for cell phone service, for your wired Ethernet. So that's where we're starting to move. And Kevin mentioned, what do you look at for a building today versus 3 years out? It could be drastically different. Now I can tell you the new architectures cost the same, if not more, than the old architectures. But that level of innovation is going to continue to evolve, and those prices will come down, and we can hit, instead of, we can hit smaller venues and start to have a better price point and get to more of these venues. Because you're right, there's 10,000 buildings out there where we've just scratched the surface.
Kevin, I'm going to ask you your opinion on this one and make it more of a general question. A true turnkey DAS integrator, what's the value add for the enterprise? And generically, if you want, what are the kind of the crucial components there that would bring that value?
So from an integrator perspective, what's unique about the integrators today versus the enterprise? I mean, if you look at, say, Wi-Fi, you can pretty much walk into most enterprises and there's someone knowledgeable about Wi-Fi. It's not the case for 4G technology and cellular technology. So that knowledge is in the carriers, it's in the integrators, it's in the manufacturers. It has not moved into the enterprise itself. And so you have, basically that knowledge base is missing. So the integrator does fill that knowledge base. And what a good integrator has to do is basically stay up to speed. So like I said, mentioned earlier, there are requirements that the carriers put on every one of these systems that go into a building. So the integrator has to stay up to speed on that, and there's basically training and credentials that we have to maintain associated with that. You have to maintain that for all the different equipment manufacturers. So there are multiple equipment manufacturers, and they all have different points of value in different scenarios. And so, maintaining those kind of things. And so that's really what the integrator does, is the integrator brings that knowledge, because at the end of the day, we are laying out, like an architect would, an RF plan for getting 5 bars of coverage inside of a facility, everywhere in the facility. So, and that requires, that specific knowledge and working with those.
Let's talk about LTE. Is there a business case, first of all, for the enterprise world? And if there is, who's benefited from that, at least in the past?
Yeah, so business cases are interesting to talk about, because how many people have deployed Wi-Fi in this room? Or have Wi-Fi in their facility? All right, almost everybody, right? How many of you did a business case for Wi-Fi? That's what I thought. It doesn't happen, right? No one does a business case for Wi-Fi. Why? Because it's table stakes, right? 4G technology is becoming table stakes. Everyone's carrying smartphones, and basically going down that path. Now, what we talk to our customers about, Kevin kind of alluded to this, is there are multiple wireless technologies that we're dealing with now inside of a building, whether it's Wi-Fi for Kirk, whether it's medical telemetry, and whether it's 4G technology. So when we start to look at these and you say, okay, I have a device that could be on Wi-Fi or it could be on the 4G network. So which one should it be? How do I decide? Right? So for instance, we worked with one hospital where their patient satisfaction scores were horrible. Their physician satisfaction scores were horrible. And when they started to dig into it, one of the biggest issues was the cell phones in the buildings didn't work, and they had to get on a restricted Wi-Fi network, a restricted guest network that restricted them from going to the entire internet. Right? It's what people want now is they want to be able to use their device that they use on the street the same as they are using it on the street or at home when they walk into a building. They don't want to have to switch networks or be on a restricted network. So we actually started moving that guest traffic off of the Wi-Fi network and onto the cellular network, and guess what? The patient satisfaction scores went up because all of a sudden the patients were reachable, right? They didn't have to use the phone at the bedside. The physician scores went up because they no longer had to go through the intricacies of logging onto the Wi-Fi network. They could use their device the same way they used the device in their practice. And the hospital actually ended up being happier and having more bandwidth on their Wi-Fi for their mission-critical applications that they are running on Wi-Fi. So when we look at business cases, we're not looking at one. We're looking at what's the best strategy comprehensively in your
If we were
facility.
to kind of wind this up, but if you guys have quickly, the one thing you'd like this group kind of to take away from what we're doing here, what would you say that is? Well, first one's always the toughest.
Sorry.
Well, so I think what's important is that we are wireless now. I mean, this is just we're going to get more and more, and the 50,000% increases in data are going to continue to happen. I mean, AT&T just announced that they're doubling people's data rates for new plans to go from 15 gig to 30 gig. That bandwidth is being used, and it's going to continue to be used. And people really want the same experience that they have at home, on the street, inside of buildings. And we all know the statistics, 80% of calls are made inside of buildings. So we have to give people that same level of coverage, that same level of capacity inside of buildings that they have on outside. And the good news is there's ways to do it. The bad news is, it can be expensive and it takes a long time, but it's doable. So getting that budget in place is important, and then working with the right partners to basically get it done.
Yeah, if I may add, I think from our perspective, for integrators and for carriers, what we want to see is involvement of the end user in those discussions of having carriers co-locate or not. It's really hard for us to get a message that says, we weren't able to agree to terms and that's why you're not going to get coverage over there. We really have to be a more participating part and role in those conversations. Sometimes there are assumptions that, we couldn't agree with funding, we can't do this. Help us help the whole scenario work. I mean, that sometimes ownership may have funding availability and may have critical operations that will drive the need for that coverage. So if there's any way that carrier to carrier you don't have an agreement, or integrator to carrier there is no agreement, let us be a part of that conversation. Let us come in and help you brainstorm about how to bring that to a closure, because ultimately that's really the result that we want to see on the property level, so we're also able to benefit from having those carriers co-locate.
I would say everybody wants a piece of the healthcare pie because there's a lot of money. I would say know your industry. If you're going to come talk to us on healthcare, I mean, you all may believe that wireless and DAS is industry agnostic, but it isn't. So I would say know your industry inside and out, and if you come to us and you don't know healthcare, we'll know it. We'll know it very quickly.
And I guess the common thread here is, the message to take away is proactive versus reactive. Anybody that's been in telecom or DAS space for more than 5 or 10 years will tell you it's really been the tail wagging the dog, right? I mean, none of us 10 years ago, would have had this panel, could have known that we were going to be in this intensive bandwidth issue. The carriers need all of us in this room. They're not able to do much on their own, right? We're a very needed thread. So talking early, like I mentioned, and just to Alex's point, getting with that end user and really educating them and telling them what they can do, and then really kind of wrapping that up as early as possible with the carriers to see if there's buy-in. I mean, we continue to see the carriers funding less and less opportunities. However, the opportunity size is huge. There's an indefinite or an infinite amount of enterprise solutions that the customer needs, yet there's a finite number of big, large venues. I would say most of them are almost already done, right? So that's kind of where this thing is. I would say LT doesn't stand for long-term evolution. It's long-term employment for all of us, because it's going to continue. We're going to always be needed.
Good point. So what we've done again, it's happened before, we run against our time. If you have questions for us, any of us, grab us at lunch, grab us when we're out and about. We'll try to help keep everybody on time, and join me in thanking our panelists today.
Thanks, Eric.